I used to think the worst sentence a wife could throw at her husband during an argument was something dramatic like, "I never loved you," or maybe the classic, "You're just like your father," which is especially effective if your father is the kind of man who thinks emotional support means grunting in your direction while changing the oil. Turns out I was aiming way too low. The sentence that actually blew a hole through my marriage was this: "You were always the temporary choice." Just like that. No thunder, no glass breaking, no dramatic violin in the background. Just my wife standing in our kitchen with one hand on the counter, the other wrapped around a wine glass like she was auditioning for the role of coldest woman in North America. At first, I honestly thought she was just trying to win the argument. People say ugly things when they're mad, but this didn't sound random. This sounded old. Like a truth she'd been carrying around for years, and had finally gotten careless enough to let it fall out. I stared at her. "What the hell did you just say?" She didn't flinch. That was the part I remember most. No instant regret, no backtracking, no, "That came out wrong." Nothing. She just took a slow sip of wine and said, "I thought you understood that." Like she was talking about parking rules. Like somewhere in the fine print of our relationship, right below wedding vows and mortgage paperwork, there had been a little note saying, "Husband is provisional, subject to replacement if original preference returns." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because sometimes your brain hears something so insane, it decides laughter is better than punching a hole through a cabinet. "Understood what exactly?" I asked. "That I'm some kind of rental husband, month to month, no security deposit?" She rolled her eyes. "Don't do that." "Don't do what?" "This performance where you act shocked." I pointed at myself. "Tessa, I'm not acting shocked. I'm experiencing shock. Live. In real time. Right here in the kitchen." She turned away from me and set the wine glass down a little too hard. "You always twist everything." "No, what I'm doing is trying to understand why my wife just told me I was the temporary choice like she's discussing a couch she bought to get through a lease." She folded her arms. "We're fighting about one thing, and now you're trying to make it about something else." That annoyed me immediately, because it's one of those sentences people use when they know they've accidentally detonated a bomb, but would prefer to discuss the curtains instead. "No," I said. "We were fighting about you disappearing half the evening and then coming home acting like I'm annoying for asking where you were. Then you said I was temporary. That is now the main topic. Congratulations to it." She gave me that look. That one. The tired, superior expression she'd developed more often over the last year. Like I was a smart dog who kept almost understanding human speech. "I'm done with this conversation," she said. "Fantastic. I'm just getting started." She grabbed her glass and moved toward the living room. I followed her. Not because I enjoy conflict, but because when your wife casually tells you that you were apparently the emotional equivalent of interim housing, you don't just nod and go brush your teeth. "Tessa." She kept walking. "Tessa." She stopped, but she didn't turn around. I said, "Explain it." Still nothing. Then, without facing me, she said, "It means exactly what it sounds like." There are moments in life when the room changes shape around you. That was one of them. It was like the furniture had shifted 2 inches to the left, and suddenly nothing in the house belonged to me the same way anymore. I should tell you something important here. I am not one of those men who spend 12 years ignoring giant glowing red signs and then act stunned when they find out their wife has been running a second life out of a yoga studio. I notice things. I remember details. I ask questions. I am not stoic. I am not passive. I am not one of those noble, silent husbands from internet stories who absorb humiliation like some kind of emotional air filter and then write 3,000 words about the moment I knew. No. If something feels off, I pull on the thread. That night, though, I didn't pull. I just looked at her and realized I had no idea what game we were suddenly playing. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it again. "You were always the temporary choice. Around 3 in the morning, I got out of bed and stood in the kitchen drinking water straight from a glass I didn't even remember grabbing. The house was quiet. Tessa had gone to sleep like a person with a normal conscience. I was standing there in the dark like a man who had just been informed his marriage came with an expiration date, and no one thought to mention it. I replayed our whole relationship. We'd been married 6 years, together for 8. We met at a friend's birthday party. She was funny, sharp, the kind of woman who could insult you and make it sound like a compliment if she was in the mood. She liked that I talked back. I liked that she didn't perform sweetness for anyone. We clicked fast. At least I thought we did. By 4 in the morning, my brain had become a very mean private investigator. Why had she always been weirdly vague about college? Why did I know more about the summer camp she attended at age 12 than I did about the 4 years she spent at Northridge University? Why were there almost no old pictures of her anywhere? Not in albums, not framed, not even buried in random drawers the way everybody has those half-forgotten snapshots from bad hair years and cheap apartments. Why had every conversation about college end with something like, "That was forever ago," or "You'd be bored," or "Trust me, you don't want those stories"? Back then, I had taken it as normal privacy. People don't owe you a documentary series about their life before you. I never demanded one. But now it felt less like privacy and more like selective demolition. The next morning, she acted normal. That was almost insulting. She walked into the kitchen, her hair pulled back in a bun, dressed in a business suit, completely prepared, making coffee as if she hadn't set my nervous system on fire 12 hours ago. I was already at the table. She opened the cabinet. "You're still upset." I leaned back in my chair. "That is a very gentle word for what's happening." She sighed. "Nolan, I was angry. Angry people say stupid things. You said something specific." She didn't answer. I pushed. "So which is it? Were you lying last night, or are you lying now?" She turned toward me with the coffee mug in her hands. "I'm not doing this before work." "You should have thought about that before telling me I was basically your emotional substitute teacher." Her jaw tightened. I said something harsh. "No, you said something revealing." She gave me a long look then, the kind that tries to measure how much of the lie can still be salvaged. Finally, she said, "You're making too much of it." I almost smiled. That phrase, the national anthem of guilty people. I stood up. "Tessa, I want you to listen carefully. We are not moving on from this because you've decided it's inconvenient. You do not get to drop a sentence like that into my skull and then ask me to respect business hours." She set the mug down. "What do you want me to say?" "The truth would be fun. Let's start there." She crossed her arms again. Defensive posture. Classic. "You want the truth?" she said. "The truth is, you always overanalyze things. You take one sentence and build a conspiracy board around it." I nodded slowly. "Interesting defense. Very strong. Except I don't need string and pushpins to know what the word temporary means." She grabbed her bag from the counter. "I'm leaving." "Of course you are." She headed for the front door. I followed her again. At the door, I said, "You're going to have to talk eventually." She put on her sunglasses without looking at me. Then eventually. The door shut. I stood there for a full 5 seconds staring at it. Then I stayed home to work. I tried to work. I answered emails, took a call, opened a spreadsheet and stared at it long enough to achieve a spiritual separation from numbers entirely. By noon, I gave up pretending. If she wasn't going to explain, I was going to start asking the house questions. People think secrets live in phones. Phones are amateur hour. Real secrets live in the stuff people forgot they kept. I started in the hall closet because it was the most obvious place for old paperwork, and because anger makes even bad plans feel efficient. Nothing there except tax folders, travel bags, one dead flashlight, and enough reusable grocery totes to survive an environmental collapse. Then I checked the guest room closet. Mostly holiday decorations, wrapping paper, a broken lamp, A sealed plastic bin labeled MISC in Tessa's handwriting, which is the organizational equivalent of sweeping your soul into a corner and throwing a sheet over it. Inside were old notebooks, a scarf, loose photos, ticket stubs, greeting cards, and one small rectangular box with a lid. That got my attention. I sat on the floor and opened it. The first thing I saw was a photo. Tessa looked younger, obviously, maybe 20, 21, hair longer, less polished, happier maybe, and next to her was a guy I'd never seen before. Tall, dark hair, broad shoulders, easy smile. One arm around her waist like he'd done it 1,000 times. Not a group photo, not random, not some friend. I picked up another. Same guy, different place, outdoor concert. She was leaning into him, laughing at something off camera. Another one. Same guy again. Sitting on what looked like the hood of a car, their knees touching, her head tilted against his shoulder. By the fourth photo, I muttered, "Well, hello there, mystery guy." I kept going. Concert tickets, postcards, a folded campus map, a movie stub with handwriting on the back, a bracelet made of cheap braided cord, relationship debris. Not enough to make a scrapbook, but too much to call meaningless. And in almost every piece of it, there he was. It's strange, the first jealousy you feel over a ghost. Because this man wasn't in my life, but somehow he had already been there the whole time without my knowing it. I flipped over one of the photos. On the back, in faded blue ink, were the words, "Summer with Adrian." Adrian. So now the ghost had a name. I sat there on the guest room floor with photos spread around me, feeling something ugly and focused begin to take shape. I wasn't panicking. I was getting interested. That evening, I didn't wait for her to settle in. The moment she got home and set her keys on the table, I held up one of the photos. "Who's Adrian?" She froze. Then she took off her coat and said too casually, "Where did you get that?" "From the box in the guest room labeled MISC, which I assume stands for Marriage Implosion Surprise Collection." She gave me a look. "You went through my things?" I almost applauded. There it was again. That neat little pivot guilty people love. Never answer the question. "Do not," I said. "Try to turn this into me invading your privacy when I'm holding a photograph of my wife wrapped around a man I have somehow never heard of in 8 years. She walked over and took the photo from my hand. "He's from college." Very informative. Was he the janitor? Debate club? Secret husband? She exhaled through her nose. "Can you not do this right now?" I laughed once. "Amazing. You really do have a default setting, don't you? Deny, deflect, delay." She set the photo down on the counter with sharp little movements. "His name is Adrian. We dated. A long time ago. It ended." "How long?" She shrugged. "A few years." That shrug irritated me more than the answer. "A few years," I repeated. "See, that's interesting, because most people don't store multiple romantic shrine artifacts for a few years situation. It's not a shrine." "No? Because if I had a hidden box full of old photos with one woman all over them, I promise you, we would not be calling it a neutral storage decision." She leaned on the counter and rubbed her temple. "What do you want from me, Nolan?" "The truth, with details, ideally in chronological order." She looked tired now, but not ashamed. That difference mattered. "We met in college," she said. "We were together for a while, then he left. That was it." "He left where?" "Abroad." "For what?" "Work. I don't know why this matters." I stared at her. "You really don't know why it matters that my wife hid a 6-foot chapter of her life in a box and then told me I was temporary?" Her eyes flashed. "I said I was angry? And now you're evasive." She pushed off the counter. "Because this is pointless." "No," I said, stepping in front of her path, not touching her, just enough to make her stop and actually face me. "Pointless was arguing about your weird schedule. This feels like the part where I find out I accidentally built my life on top of someone else's unfinished business." For the first time, she looked genuinely rattled, but only for a second. Then she straightened up and gave me a flat, cold stare. He's not part of my life anymore. There it was. Too fast, too clean, too final. The kind of sentence people rehearse because they need it to be true more than it actually is. I said, "That wasn't my question. It's my answer." "Right. And it's a bad one." She picked up her phone and bag. "I'm taking a shower." I stepped aside and let her go. That night I didn't say much. Neither did she. We ate in near silence. At one point she asked if I was going to make this weird all week, which was such a spectacularly dishonest framing of the situation that I almost choked on my food. I set my fork down and said, "Tessa, to be clear, you hid an entire man from the narrative of your life, told me I was temporary, and now you're asking whether I'm going to make this weird." She stared at her plate. "You love drama." "No," I said. "I married it." She stood up, took her plate, and walked away. I let her. Then I sat there for a while, thinking. When you realize someone has built an architecture around a part of their past, you begin to wonder what exactly they were trying to hide. I didn't sleep much that night either. But unlike the night before, I had direction now. A name. Adrian. When she finally drifted off beside me, breathing slow and even, I lay there staring at the ceiling and thought, fine. If you want to act like this man vanished into smoke and mythology, I'll go find out why your voice changed when you said his name. And that was the moment curiosity stopped being curiosity. That was the moment it became an investigation. I didn't confront her again the next day. Not because I had suddenly become calm and reasonable. No. I didn't confront her because I wanted information first. Arguments without information are just loud guessing. And I hate guessing. So instead of starting another kitchen debate that would end with her telling me I was overreacting, I decided to go looking for the part of the story she kept refusing to tell. Step 1. The Internet. The Internet is an incredible invention. It allows you to order groceries, learn to repair engines, and destroy your own emotional stability simply by entering a stranger's name in the search bar. The problem was, I didn't know his last name. That meant starting with the one thing people never think about when they hide a past. Other people remember it. Tessa had gone to Northridge University. That much I knew. I also knew roughly what year she graduated because we once had an argument about student loans, and she made a comment about how long she'd been paying them. So I started there. University Facebook groups, old graduation pages, alumni forums. It took about 40 minutes before I started seeing familiar faces from the photos I had found in the box. Eventually, I found one group photo from a campus event. And there she was. Tessa, about 20 years old, leaning slightly toward a tall guy with dark hair, and the exact same relaxed smile I had already seen in half the photos in that box. The caption under the picture listed names. That's how I got the rest of the puzzle. Adrian Keller. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen. I clicked his name. Profile locked. Of course, that's how these things go. The one person you want information about immediately becomes the digital equivalent of a locked door with a try again later sign. But social media has a flaw. Friends tag things, friends comment, friends talk. Within another 20 minutes, I had confirmation of something that made my stomach twist in a very specific way. Tessa and Adrian weren't just some casual college relationship. They were a couple, a very public one. Photos from parties, photos from road trips, photos from graduation dinners. Everywhere I looked, it was the same thing. Tessa and Adrian. Almost 5 years of them, according to a timeline I pieced together from posts and comments. That's not a college fling. That's a whole era. I leaned back and rubbed my face. Almost 5 years, I muttered, which raised a very obvious question. How can you date someone for so many years and then never mention it to your husband during your 8-year relationship? Not even as a funny story, not even as an awkward memory, not even as the classic relationship disclaimer people love to make. Oh yeah, I had this serious boyfriend in college, but that was ancient history. Nothing. Tessa had erased him from the narrative completely. That's not forgetfulness. That's editing. I kept digging. Eventually, I found a comment thread under an old graduation photo. Someone had written, "Can't believe Adrian is actually leaving. You two were supposed to be the forever couple." Another comment replied, "Seriously, I thought Tessa was going to follow him." Follow him. That caught my attention. So I clicked on the profile of the girl who had written it. Her name was Maya. From what I could tell, she had been part of the same friend group during college. She didn't know me, which meant she had no reason to filter anything she said. I stared at the message box for a while before typing. "Hi Maya. Sorry for the random message. I'm Nolan, Tessa's husband." Yes, that felt weird to write. Even weirder was what came next. "I found an old university photo and noticed you were friends with her back then. I had a quick question about someone named Adrian Keller." I stared at the message for a full minute before hitting send. Then I sat there, feeling vaguely like a detective who had just knocked on a stranger's door without a warrant. The reply came faster than I expected. 5 minutes later, my screen lit up. Maya. Wow, that's a name I haven't heard in years. That was not comforting. I typed back. "Yeah, I just found some old photos and realized I know almost nothing about that part of her life." There was a pause. Then the typing bubble appeared again. "Maya. Wait, you didn't know about Adrian?" I actually laughed out loud, because the tone of that message felt like the moment in a movie where the side character realizes the main character has absolutely no idea what's going on. "No," I wrote. "Apparently I missed that chapter." Another pause. Then, "Maya. That's surprising." I leaned forward and typed. "They dated in college, right?" Her reply came quickly this time. "Yeah, for a long time." "How long?" "Pretty much the entire time we were there." Which matched what I had already figured out. Then came the message that made the room feel smaller. Honestly, everyone thought they'd end up married. I stared at the screen, not because that was shocking by itself. College couples talk about forever all the time. Half of them believe it. The other half just enjoy the drama of pretending they do. But something about the way she wrote it felt different. What happened? He got a job overseas after graduation. Where? Germany, some tech company. So they broke up? Yeah. Another pause. Then she added, "Well, sort of. Sort of. That's a dangerous phrase." "What does sort of mean?" I wrote. A few seconds later, they tried long distance for a while, but eventually it just faded. I leaned back in my chair again, staring at the conversation. Then I asked the question that had been sitting in the back of my mind since the moment I opened that box. Did she ever get over him? This time the reply took longer. A full minute passed, then 2. Finally Maya wrote, "That's hard to say," which is the kind of answer people give when the real answer would make the situation uncomfortable. I pushed. "What do you mean?" Another pause. Then, "Let's just say, when he left, everyone thought she might wait for him." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Wait how long?" I asked. Maya replied with a little laughing emoji. "Forever, probably." Then she added, "But life moves on, right?" Right. Life moves on. People get jobs. They get apartments. They meet new people. They get married. Sometimes they even convince themselves they're done waiting. I thanked her for the information and closed the chat. Then I sat there in the quiet of my office, staring at nothing. I thought about that sentence again. You were always the temporary choice. At the time, I had assumed it was just cruelty. Now it felt like something else, like a sentence that had been waiting around for a very long time. That evening when Tessa came home, I didn't say anything about what I had learned. I just watched her. At one point, she caught me looking at her. "What?" "Nothing." "You're staring." "I'm thinking." "That's rarely a good sign." I smiled a little. "You have no idea." She shook her head and went back to her phone. A few seconds later it buzzed. Her eyes flicked down instantly. Then she typed something. Quickly. Too quickly. Like someone who didn't want a message sitting unanswered. My curiosity sharpened. Work? I asked casually. Yeah, she said. Lie. I didn't even need to see the screen. You can hear a lie in a person's breathing if you know them long enough. Later that night, she took a shower, and she left her phone on the kitchen counter. I wasn't planning to check it. That's the honest truth. But when the screen lit up with a notification, I looked without thinking. Just a reflex. The contact name was saved as initials. AK. My chest tightened. The message preview was short. But it was enough. Feels strange seeing you again after all these years. For a moment I just stood there, very still. Like if I moved too quickly, the sentence might disappear and pretend it never existed. I let out a slow breath. Well, I murmured quietly to the empty kitchen. That didn't take long. Because suddenly the timeline made perfect sense. 5-year relationship. Man leaves the country. Woman marries someone else. Years pass. Then one day the original man comes back. And apparently the reunion coffee had already happened. So the ghost had returned. And judging by the way my wife had been acting lately, he hadn't come back quietly. Tessa came out of the shower a few minutes later, hair wet, wearing one of those oversized hoodies she liked to steal from my side of the closet. She pulled out leftovers and started heating them up. For a few minutes, the only sound in the kitchen was the microwave humming and the occasional tap of her phone lighting up again. Every time it buzzed, her eyes moved to it instantly. I leaned against the counter and watched her. Finally, she noticed. What? She asked. You've checked your phone 14 times in the last 10 minutes. That's not true. You just checked it again while telling me that. She rolled her eyes. It's work. Of course it is. She stared at me for a moment. You're still on this. You told me I was temporary. I said something during a fight. And now the guy you dated for half a decade is texting you about how strange it feels seeing you again. Her expression froze, just for a second. Then she recovered. You looked at my phone? I looked at a notification. That's the same thing. No, I said calmly. The same thing would have been me scrolling through your messages. What I did was read the sentence that lit up the screen like a neon sign. She grabbed the phone from the counter. You're being paranoid. I laughed softly. That's the second time you've used that strategy. What strategy? Minimizing reality. She crossed her arms. It was coffee, Nolan. Coffee is amazing, I said. It's apparently responsible for about 70% of bad decisions in adult relationships. It was one meeting. And you didn't think that was worth mentioning? It wasn't important. I stared at her. You hid a 5-year relationship from me, and now you're secretly meeting the same guy again. But sure, let's call it unimportant. She shook her head and grabbed her plate from the microwave. I'm not doing this tonight. That seems to be your favorite phrase. She sat down and started eating. Conversation over. Or at least that's what she thought. Because the next day something happened that made the whole situation a lot clearer. I was leaving a coffee shop near my office when I saw her car. And inside the cafe, through the big front windows, I saw them. Tessa and Adrian. You know that moment when your brain recognizes something before your emotions catch up? That's what it felt like. I just stood there on the sidewalk with a coffee cup in my hand, staring through the glass. They were sitting close, not touching, but close enough that you didn't need subtitles to understand the scene. They were laughing. Adrian leaned back in his chair, saying something. Tessa covered her mouth with her hand the way she always did when something genuinely amused her. I hadn't seen that laugh in a while, and that detail hit harder than I expected. I stayed there maybe 30 seconds. Then I stepped inside. Because I am not the kind of man who sees his wife on what looks suspiciously like a reunion date and decides to handle it later through emotional journaling. No. I walked straight to their table. Tessa noticed me first. Her smile disappeared instantly. Nolan, Adrian turned around. He looked almost exactly like he had in the photos. Older, obviously, a little sharper around the edges, but the same relaxed confidence. For a second, the three of us just looked at each other. Then I pulled out the empty chair at their table and sat down. "Well," I said calmly, setting my coffee on the table. "This must be the famous coffee." Adrian blinked. Tessa looked like someone had just unplugged the electricity from her brain. I extended my hand across the table. "You must be Adrian." He hesitated. Then he shook it. "Yeah." "Nolan," I said. "Temporary husband. Nice to finally meet the permanent storyline." Tessa closed her eyes briefly. "Nolan, this isn't—" "Oh, relax," I said. "I'm not here to throw drinks or quote wedding vows. I was just curious what the 5-year prequel looked like in person." Adrian leaned back slightly. "You okay, man?" I smiled. "That depends. Are you planning to steal my parking spot or just my marriage?" Tessa pushed her chair back. "That's enough." "No, actually," I said, still calm. "This is the first honest conversation happening in this entire situation." Adrian looked at Tessa. "You didn't tell him?" Tessa grabbed her bag. "We're leaving." I stood up too. "Relax. I'm leaving." I looked at Adrian. "You were kind of a legend in my house without ever showing up." He didn't respond. Tessa avoided my eyes completely. I walked out of the cafe and into the afternoon sunlight feeling strangely calm, because something important had just happened. Until that moment, Adrian had been a ghost, a story, a shadow in a box of photographs. Now he was real. That night, when she came home, the tension in the house felt different, heavier, more honest. She dropped her keys on the counter. "You embarrassed me today." I laughed. "That's the headline you're going with?" "You didn't have to do that." "Oh, I absolutely did." She rubbed her temples. "You turned it into a scene." "No," I said quietly. "You turned it into a secret." She looked up at me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said the thing that had been forming in my head all day. "So, let me get this straight." She waited. "You dated him for years?" "Yes." "He leaves?" "Yes." "You marry me?" "Yes." "And now he's back." Her silence answered the rest. I nodded slowly. So, I was the backup plan. She didn't argue, didn't deny it. Didn't even look surprised that I'd reached that conclusion. After a long moment, she said quietly, "You were the life I chose when he left." I folded my arms. "And now?" She met my eyes and said the one thing that made the entire story finally make sense. "Now he's back." For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. You'd think a moment like that would feel explosive. People imagined shouting, crying, doors slamming, dramatic speeches about betrayal and destiny. Instead, it felt quiet, like the room had finally stopped pretending. "Right," I said slowly. Tessa stood across the kitchen, arms folded, watching me the way people watch storms from behind glass. "And what does that mean exactly?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately, which told me everything. "I don't know yet." I laughed once. Translated from relationship language into English, it usually means, "I'm deciding whether to ruin your life or not." "That's comforting," I said. "Nolan—" "No, really," I continued. "I love that answer. It's very efficient. It means I get to sit here like a contestant on a reality show while you figure out whether the grand prize is your husband or your ex." She frowned. "You're twisting this." "No," I said calmly. "I'm describing it." "What do you want me to do?" she asked finally. That question annoyed me more than anything she'd said so far, because it implied this was some complicated moral puzzle instead of the simple situation it actually was. "What I want," I said, "is for my wife not to be emotionally rebooting a 5-year relationship while still married to me." "You're making it sound like I planned this." "I'm making it sound like you didn't stop it. So the whole time we were building this life," I said, gesturing around the house. There was always this little emergency exit in your head. She was silent. Finally, I said quietly, "You waited years for him." She didn't deny it. I grabbed my keys from the counter. She looked up. "What are you doing?" I shrugged slightly. "Solving the problem." "Nolan." I walked toward the door. She followed me a few steps. "Where are you going?" I turned back once. "You've already been waiting for him," I said. Then I opened the door. "I'm not waiting for you." And I walked out. I didn't go back to the house that night. I stayed with a friend for a few days. Told him the short version. His response was very simple. "Man," he said, handing me a beer, "sounds like you married a placeholder." It was brutal, but it was also the most accurate summary of my marriage anyone had given me. The next few weeks were surprisingly quiet. Just logistics, lawyers, paperwork, the strange, sterile process of dismantling a life that had once felt permanent. Just a quiet acceptance that the story had finally reached the part she had apparently been expecting all along. About a month after I moved out, I saw them again, not intentionally. I was walking through a downtown street on a Saturday afternoon when I spotted them across the road. Tessa and Adrian. They were walking together, talking, laughing like they had simply picked up a conversation that had been paused years ago. She looked happy. The kind of relaxed happiness people have when they're exactly where they always wanted to be. And that's when something unpleasant settled in my chest. Not jealousy, not heartbreak. Something worse. Understanding. Because standing there, watching them walk together like they had never been apart, I realized something brutally simple. I was never the main story. I was the waiting room, the stable years, the safe option, the man who happened to be there when the one she actually wanted wasn't. I was the house she lived in while her real home was somewhere else. 8 years, 6 of them married. And the whole time I thought we were building a life together. Turns out I was just maintaining it until the original owner came back. That's the part that stings. Not losing her. Not the divorce. The realization that someone can stand next to you for years. Share your bed. Share your plans. Let you believe you're building something real. While quietly knowing that if one particular person ever walks back into their life, everything you built becomes temporary. Suddenly that sentence she threw at me in the kitchen made perfect sense. You were always the temporary choice. She hadn't said it to hurt me. She said it because it was true. And honestly, that realization changed something in me. Because betrayal hurts. But being used, that hits deeper. I stood there for a moment watching them disappear down the street. Then I shook my head and laughed quietly to myself. 8 years she had waited for him. And 8 years she had spent with me pretending she wasn't. I turned and kept walking, because one thing was suddenly very clear. I may have been the temporary choice, but at least I wasn't the one who spent years living a lie. If you felt this story hit hard, drop a like, subscribe for more, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support keeps Steelheart beating.